It's Wednesday, February. Oh my goodness, it's February the 5th, 2025. It's a Carolina Weather Group doubleheader. Buckle up. Here we go. Where does the time go? I can't believe it's February. James Brierton here in Charlotte. We've got Frank Strait in Columbia, South Carolina, and Corey Davis, the assistant climatologist, state climatologist here in North Carolina. And Frank's also going to be wearing two hats. He's Frank Strait, as you see him and love him every week here in the Carolina Weather Group, but he's also representing his day job. Some of you may know that he's the severe weather liaison for South Carolina DNR, and that's because this week we're going to be talking about the 2024 climate records across the globe, the warmest on record. And these two guys are going to let us know how we shaped up here at home. And then coming up in the second half hour, you've been seeing their promos right here on the Carolina Weather Group, and we're so happy to be an event partner. We're going to be learning more about Girls Who Chase, their spring training webinar coming up. We'll be hearing from leader and founder Jennifer Walton in our second half hour. But let's start with Corey and Frank. It's so good to see you both, and what a week to be talking about how warm 2024 was, because we've had record-breaking warmth here in the Carolinas. Corey, I'll start with you. I guess that's kind of par for the course.
Yeah, this is exactly what we saw all of 2024. In fact, in North Carolina, if we look at all 12 months of the last year, each one was warmer than the historical average. It's only the third time that's ever happened. It happened in 1998. It happened in 2017. It happened again in 2024. And this graph shows it really well. Every month was warmer. We had several very warm months. You look at November in particular, almost 6 degrees warmer than average. Also, we saw that warmth coming out of last winter around this time of the year and then going into the spring. Interestingly, the least warm months relative to average were in the late summer and early fall. Of course, that's when we started getting some of those tropical systems coming through, more of those cloudy days mixed in there, but still those ended up being warm months. And again, looking at the year as a whole, the second warmest year on record for North Carolina. Frank, I think South Carolina also had one of their top 5 warmest years. And as you said, James, the warmest year on record globally. So no matter where you went or when in the year you looked, it was really hard to escape that abnormal warmth throughout 2024.
Frank, how did things look there?
It was a warm year for us too in South Carolina. James, I got the monthly breakdown on my screen share there, and this comes from the wonderful Melissa Griffin, our assistant state climatologist, who couldn't be with us tonight, and so I'm pinch hitting for her. But we had a warm year. There were no below average months at all. We had 5 that were near average, and then 7 that were above average. And November, like in North Carolina, was well above average in South Carolina, the second warmest November on record for statewide averages. So, it was a pretty warm year overall. And in fact, for statewide rankings, it was the 5th warmest year on record for us since 1895. With one region of South Carolina, including the Central Savannah River area and parts of the Midlands and upstate, having its warmest year on record.
It's interesting to see that regional breakdown for audio listeners, especially our friend and producer Tim Pounds, who lives over in that Augusta area. It's you taking home the record here. Gentlemen, I will tell you here in Charlotte, and I mean, I know across both Carolinas, I feel like last summer, I just hid inside in the air conditioning the whole time. It was like so hot. It was getting to the point, Corey, where I was like, this is actually impacting my ability to spend summer vacation outside with my kids.
Yeah, it had been a few years since we had one of those hard-hitting summers from the get-go, and that's what happened last year. In the first or second week of May, we started to see those 90-degree days. That kept on through June, and especially once we got into June, we were seeing that extreme heat, 100-degree temperatures in some areas, and also that really dry weather alongside that. So that's why we were seeing that flash drought that developed so quickly early in the summer. And you're right, it was at the point where you just couldn't bear to be outside. It was so hot and so dry for so long. You see here on our monthly temperature or precipitation graphic, the interesting story, at least for the first half of 2024, was the back and forth nature of our precipitation. We would have one wet month followed by a dry one. And really that lasted through the first half of the year until we finally started seeing more of those pretty regular rain events and some of those tropical systems later in the summer. But again, especially it stands out how dry June was. And then on the other side of that tropical weather, how dry October was. And that's a dry pattern and a drought that is still with us now in early 2025. We just have not seen the rain that we've been looking for this winter to get over some of those deficits that started building back in the fall.
I suppose in a very specific manner, we were somewhat grateful for how dry October, November, and December were because of all that excess rainfall that you see there from September. Corey, just speak to us a little bit about September in particular. I know Helene and that predecessor rain event.
Yeah, really, even if you go back to August, we had Tropical Storm Debbie. I know that was a big event down in South Carolina as well. Parts of southeastern North Carolina had 12, 15 inches of rain from Debbie. Fast forward a little over a month, that potential tropical cyclone 8 comes up the coast, another 20-inch rain event in some spots. And then, of course, the event that not only defines our weather, but defines just our history for 2024 in the Carolinas was Hurricane Helene. We know what the rainfall totals were like, 20 to 30 inches in some areas in western North and South Carolina. We know what the wind impacts were like. We know what the flooding was like. And you're right, folks are still dealing with those impacts now. It is certainly going to be a long rebuilding process stretching well through 2025. But looking back at 2024, that was the big event of the year weather-wise. And again, just knowing it's the costliest and deadliest hurricane on record in North Carolina, I believe for South Carolina as well, that really does define our year in 2024.
Yeah, Frank, let me punt this to you in terms of impacts of precipitation. What impacts did you see across the year, but I guess with Helene in particular?
Like you heard Corey said, what applies to North Carolina mostly applies to South Carolina too. We started the year in a bit of a drought, but January was a wet month, and that started to get us out of it. And February was close to average, and March was above average. Then April to May were fairly close to average, but around May 15th, it's you could say the spigot was turned off, and it stayed dry for 2 months straight in South Carolina.
My lawn would agree.
June was right, and not only was it dry in South Carolina, it was also really hot. With a number of 100-degree days. I remember one day we were 104 here in Columbia, and downtown USC thermometer was 106 that day. So we did have some pretty extreme heat here in South Carolina. Started out as a dry heat, just intense desert-like heat, but gradually the humidity we're famous for kicked in, and it sure was oppressive by the time we got to the end of June and into July. However, and once you get to this point, the monthly breakdowns, they show you where some months were wet, some months were dry, but nature doesn't follow a calendar, and these aren't really representative of the feast versus famine that we had in South Carolina for rainfall. We had now that famine, of course, went in May, June, and early July, and then around the 15th of July, the plumber finally got and replaced that spigot and replaced it with a fire hose here in South Carolina, and it started. We had several significant rain events in late July, and then Debbie in August, which was just an absolute deluge along our coastal plain and some adjacent areas too. And then after Debbie, it pretty much didn't rain again until Helene got to town. And Helene was another huge rain event that caused another round of severe flooding. In addition to the wind damage that was especially bad across the central Savannah River area and into the upstate, and as far east as the I-77 corridor too. But after Helene, there went the rain. It disappeared until we got to November. October was one of the driest months on record in South Carolina, second driest on record statewide, and a tie for the driest here in Columbia, as we only had a trace of rain in Columbia here in October. But in early November, the rains came back, and we had another huge rain event over especially Orangeburg County, but large parts of the Midlands and Low Country and Central Savannah River area got the deluge that day. But another round of flooding came from that, and then things finally were more merciful in terms of rainfall in December, where we had a near average month overall.
Corey, for North Carolina, you also sent along this chart that shows the drought monitor throughout the year, and I think it also speaks a little bit to that fast versus famine that both of you guys kind of hit upon as we kind of ping pong back and forth throughout the year. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the overall statistics, we mentioned it was the second warmest year on record for North Carolina, also the 30th wettest year on record. And of course, we
Wow.
think about those storms in the fall, like Helene. Those definitely were a big contributor to that overall wet ranking. But you see on this graph, we had parts of the state that were classified as abnormally dry or in some degree of drought pretty much all year. So that really does show we could have both extremes happening at almost the same time. So we could have that heavy rainfall, but also that extreme drought. And like Frank said, you got to that mid to late May point, the spigot just turned off. That's when we started getting into that very dry early summer pattern. We saw a majority of the state that was in moderate to severe drought by late June, early July. And then we saw the same thing in the fall, coming off of Helene and all the heavy rain and flooding from that storm. We got back into the dry pattern, back into the drought by the end of the year. So this is something that our office has started seeing more and more of in North Carolina over the past few years. We've actually got a term for that. We've started calling this weather whiplash because we bounce back and forth so quickly between the wet times and the dry times, almost unpredictably. You just never know when you're going to be in for more wet or in for more dry. And we've seen that multiple times, especially over the past year, just going from one extreme to the other. And especially just look back at those last 3 or 4 months of the year, going from the extremes of heavy rain and flooding to the extremes of drought.
Corey, when you joined us here in the Carolina Weather Group after Helene, I know we got an opportunity to talk with you about changing climate, warming climate, more moisture, and listening to us again here talk tonight about kind of this whiplash back and forth. Is there a bigger picture that goes beyond just 2024 that kind of connects all these dots?
Well, I think both in 2024 and also say the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen a lot more of these so-called fingerprints of climate change on our weather. Just looking at last year, we think back to how we were coming out of the winter. We had very little cold weather last winter. By February, we were already in spring-like temperatures. There was really no late spring freeze events, so very unseasonably warm, kind of on that shoulder season. That's something we've also started to see more of on the other end of the year, going into the fall. And that's also something that we had last year. In North Carolina, we had places that were almost a month later than average for their first freeze of the season. It was a record long freeze-free season for the Raleigh area, 281 days between the last spring freeze and the first fall freeze. So when we think about climate change, of course, temperatures are one of the big things that we look at, but those precipitation patterns are another, and that's really where we've seen more of those big changes manifest in our weather in recent years. The wet periods are getting wetter. They're bringing more rain than we've seen historically from a single event. You look back at last year, we had 2 separate storms in Helene and in potential tropical cyclone 8 that both brought more than 18 inches of rain to parts of the state. Historically, in the 20th century, that was an unheard of sort of rain event. There were only a couple of those back before 1999 when we started seeing more and more of them. And again, it happens on the other end as well. You see the extreme wet, but also the extreme dry periods. They develop more quickly. We've even started seeing impacts of those during the wintertime, like we are now with some of the wildfires in western North Carolina. So you're not getting much of that average conditions, average rainfall like we used to. It's just getting more and more extreme as time goes on.
Yeah, here's some video from last week's fire in McDowell County. We'll talk about that coming up a little bit later on in the show. I remember last year, Corey, and you were just hitting on this. I do feel like I was watering my lawn super early and super late into the year. Also, an extended pollen season for those of us who have springtime allergies. Another year for, I guess, me to stock up my medicine cabinet. But what are the impacts with all of this when it comes to severe weather, say tornadoes?
Yeah, we saw a lot of that in 2024 in North and South Carolina. In North Carolina, we had 42 confirmed tornadoes. You see on the map here, we've highlighted some of the big events. There were several of those in the spring, which is our typical severe weather season. Some of those in the mountains, some of those down at the coast. But the big tornado contributors last year were our tropical systems. You see highlighted in these August 7th and 8th tornadoes associated with Tropical Storm Debbie down in eastern North Carolina. And then we had some of the big tornadoes associated with Helene in September. In total, 20 tornadoes last year from tropical systems. That was the most in a year and the most from tropical storms since 2020. So a very active year for tornadoes all across the state.
Frank, things shape out in South Carolina when it came to climate impacts on severe weather?
Well, we certainly had our fair share of severe thunderstorm activity and tornadoes here in South Carolina. In total, we had 48 tornadoes across South Carolina. That's the fifth highest in a year on record in South Carolina. Now, that's for total tornadoes. If you just want to count the significant ones, it wasn't that big of a deal because there was only one, which would be signified by the little yellow triangle right there, which is an EF2 tornado that hit Bamberg back on January 9th. So that was our only significant tornado, but 48 in total, and that was a bunch. By the way, the most significant tornadoes in South Carolina happened way back in 1973, when yours truly was only 1 year old. We had 16, or actually 18 that year, significant tornadoes. But as far as the tornadoes go, you see the tracks of, well, these are all points of damage surveyed by the National Weather Service across South Carolina and vicinity across 2024. And all the little triangle tracks there, those are all tornadoes. And again, most of them came from tropical cyclones, 21 from Helene and 8 more from Debbie. But there were other events too. As a matter of fact, a tornado outbreak occurred over the northern part of the state back just at the end of the year on December 29th. So there were 8 there and a couple of other tornado outbreaks during April, May, and even early June. But probably most notable thing wasn't a tornado at all. It was actually this little track here, a little blue line embedded with a green area here in York County. The April 20th it was a supercell, but it wasn't a tornado. It was all straight line winds that went across York County and caused some just mind-boggling damage in the Rock Hill area from that, and also from large hail that was up to about baseball sized. So that was another example of an extreme event, and this time it wasn't a tornado. Now, some more yellow dots you'll see on the screen here. Those are not tornadoes. Those are tropical cyclone damage points, and I think they're all from Helene that were surveyed by the National Weather Service. And some of these points over here in the Augusta area and over into McCormick County, where winds were estimated to have gusted over 100 miles an hour as Helene moved through that area.
Frank, as you were talking, I was pulling up some of the imagery to go along with some of those just remarkable events that we saw last year in South Carolina. Here are some pictures of that hail event that hit Rock Hill and left, as you put it, baseball size hail and damaged so many buildings. This was one of the first FEMA activations into our region for 2024. Actually, you know what? I stand corrected. I almost think FEMA declined this one. And that was maybe the headline that I was recalling. But we also had, as you mentioned, that Bamberg tornado, which some of you may remember seeing the surveillance video that showed that building on Main Street collapsing under the strength of that tornado, all the bricks there laid across the road. So some remarkable memories, I suppose, of the impacts of the weather in 2024. Corey, let me ask you this question, and I'm sure you run into this in your personal and your professional life. When we think about climate, regardless of what might be causing the changes, let's lean into the fact that they're there. How do you work with somebody, converse with somebody who maybe is on the fence or not convinced that the climate is changing? Do you have a go-to explanation that maybe helps paint a picture?
Well, I think in North Carolina, reality speaks louder than any concept, any idea that you could try to get across. And I look in North Carolina, one of the sectors that's been hit the hardest by these weather and climate events in recent years is agriculture. You go back especially to Hurricane Florence in 2018. There were farmers who, for the third time in less than 20 years, had been flooded by a hurricane that was coming through. And they know what the impacts of those events are like. Again, maybe they want to debate exactly what's causing it, but there's no debate on the impact that that's having on them. That's their livelihood, and having to rebuild once again after an event like Florence, and in some cases after an event like Helene last year. That tells them that something is going on. Something's different now than it was in the past, when their family had owned those same farmlands and was able to raise their crops, raise their livestock in those areas. We look back at last year as well. We think a lot about the tropical systems and the impacts they have, but we see impacts from things like drought and heat waves as well. You go back to last June, that hot, dry spell hit at the worst possible time for the corn crop. More than 60% of North Carolina's corn production was lost just during that early summer flash drought event. So again, something that we might debate exactly how much of that was a weather cause versus how much of that was climate change having an impact, but there was no debating what that impact actually was. And for farmers, 2024 was a really, really rough year. And I know that's got a lot of farmers thinking about what comes next. Can they weather another bad year in 2025 or 2026? Because certainly 2024, the weather did not do them any favors.
Frank, are there any data points that stick out to you in the big picture when you're conversing with people?
No, yeah, and South Carolina, our farmers and water systems both suffered, especially the farmers and especially the PD region this year. Look at my screen share again, James. Melissa has another good infographic here that showed the drought conditions. As I think I mentioned that we started 2024 with the upstate in drought conditions, but thanks to good rain going through the spring months, we were in good shape by April. But when the flash drought started, after the spigot was turned off in May, by the time we got to mid-June, it was just exceptionally dry with extreme drought conditions going on across much of our PD region and the eastern part of the Midlands too. And in that area, our farmers really did suffer. There were some very serious drought losses. Some of our water systems were in a little bit of trouble. You may recall the Little PD River. It had shrunk to just a mere trickle. Which it's usually has a good bit of flow going through it, and there was hardly any once we got to mid-July. But July 16th, that image you see there, that was right about the day that the fire hose got turned on. And the rest of July was wet, and we were mostly out of drought again by the time Debbie left. But after Debbie came no rain, and then came Helene with a lot of rain, and then after that, only one more significant event the rest of the year, which was the day after that last graphic, November 5th, when we had that heavy rain event that went across the southern central Savannah River areas and Midlands that dropped about a foot of rain in the Orangeburg area and caused major flash flooding there and river flooding on the Edisto. But right before that event, you can see the entire state was back in drought again, especially the coastal plain, which was at the D2 severe drought level. But again, moderate rain since then have helped somewhat, but as we ended 2024, the eastern part of the state was back in drought conditions once again.
Agricultural disasters, they maybe are not as visible to the average person who is looking for things like flash flooding or tornadoes, but they certainly do make that billion-dollar disaster map that NOAA puts out every year. We're going to be exploring that more coming up the next few weeks here in the Carolina Weather Group. Corey, as we wrap things up, is there anything on your mind here tonight that we haven't touched upon yet that you think is important for our audience to know?
Well, we're over a month into 2025. It's hard to believe when we look at the first month of the new year. A couple things I've noticed. They're both trends, one that's a little bit different from what we saw last year and one that's more of the same. When we look at our January temperatures, we're still waiting for those statewide numbers to come in, but a lot of the local weather stations across the Carolinas are reporting one of their top 10 coldest Januaries on record. We know we have now broken out of that, all 12 months being warmer than average, and we actually had a little bit of snow to show for it last month. But the one trend that we have not seen any change in is that drought and is that dryness. Even though we did have a little bit of snow last month, our overall precipitation was still below average. This is a kind of funny time of the year to be talking about drought because especially with that snow being on the ground recently, for a lot of folks, it may not be obvious that we're in a drought. You may not see those impacts. The soil in your yard, for instance, may be pretty wet. But behind the scenes and beneath the surface, we are seeing some of those stream levels and groundwater levels getting a little bit low. As we know, we're fighting wildfires in parts of western North Carolina. So the big concern is that as we're starting to get into some of these warmer days now, it may not take long for those drought impacts to really bubble up. And if we don't get some rain soon, we could be looking at a rough spring fire season and potentially a rough planting season for the farmers just without as much soil moisture. So just a couple things to keep in mind as we go through these next few weeks in February. Hope we get some good rain soon. And if we don't, then you could be looking at a very pronounced drought.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Corey, because I remember last week when we were covering those wildfires, getting comments from folks like, wait, but it just rained, it just snowed. But one event doesn't repair the whole bigger picture. Frank, any closing thoughts from you as we close the book on 2024?
Well, as far as that goes, I'm glad that we did get some snow. If you're
Sure.
deeply concerned about the drought conditions and how warm it's been, it's nice to get a cold month for a change. It's nice to get a winter storm for a change, because a few people actually do like that. But if you are concerned about drought, snow is a good thing, because especially if it melts slowly, because that way hardly any of it runs off. It ends up more of it percolating into the soil, and that we need right now. So that's a good thing. But we're still in this kind of in the same boat, is that going into 2025, it's been dry, and if we don't start getting some rain soon, then our farmers in South Carolina will be really hurting once again, and that's after a really tough 2024. So let's hope we can have a less severe and better situation in 2025 for our farmers.
Between bird flu and whatever else, we don't need anything else increasing the price of groceries.
Right.
So I'm with you on that.
Right.
Corey Davis, Frank Strait, thank you so much for helping us understand the context of what we saw in 2024 and what we can expect to see this coming year.
Yep. Thanks. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Corey. And I think Frank's going to take his hat and spin it around and carry on with
Yeah.
his Carolina Weather Group duties.
But before I do that, I'm going to shout
Okay.
out to Melissa Griffin one more time,
Yeah.
our assistant state climatologist in South Carolina, who helped prime me with some of the stuff and created the graphics with her 5-star PowerPoint skills and her five-star creativity levels. So we appreciate that. And Melissa, I owe you lunch sometime.
Well, I think we all do. I remember I got to see Melissa when we went to the Shield Museum for Weatherproof. So it's always great to catch up with Melissa. And I know she speaks highly of Corey too. So it's good that our two state climate offices get along so well. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Corey. We'll catch up with you again soon. And we're going to welcome in our next guest as we roll on here with this live edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Jen Walton is with us. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Hey, y'all. How's it going?
We're doing great.
Super excited to be saying y'all in the right.
I know. I like how you
here.
leaned into that. That was good. Well,
that's exactly right. Second person plural is y'all here. Period.
And do you know what the plural of y'all is?
Well, the plural possessive is y'alls.
Uses.
You guys.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, my favorite plural possessive, because it has 2 apostrophes in it. Y'alls.
Y'allin. Okay, gotcha.
well, Jen, am I remembering that for a time you lived here in the Carolinas?
I'm from the Carolinas.
That's actually what I thought. Okay.
I should say all over the Southeast. We moved to Chapel Hill when I was 15, and I finished high school and then actually graduated from Carolina. I'm in Colorado now, and you have to say Carolina and not UNC, because people think you're talking about UNC Greeley, University of Northern Colorado Greeley. So yes, I am a Tar Heel and proud of it.
It's like when people get the USCs confused. So, yes. Well, we're glad you're with us tonight. We've been introducing our audience to your upcoming Girls Who Chase spring webinar, but you're here tonight to speak about it and walk us through it. Before we talk about the event, let's talk a little bit more about you, if we can. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? And I'm sure that'll lead us right into why you've launched such a wonderful program.
Oh, thank you for the airtime. The short version is that my career and background is in environmental and climate change communication. I was actually the first graduate from UNC Chapel Hill with a degree in environmental communication, believe it or not. So I'm older probably than I look, and really have had a long time career in the sciences and started storm chasing in 2018. I've always been into severe weather. I've always kind of been on the fringe of that severe weather world, tried to kind of name drop my way in to get people to take me chasing with them, as one does, and kind of eventually threw in the towel for a bit, just was not finding a way in, was really interested in working in severe weather communication, couldn't figure that one out either, in part because I liked working on the NGO side, but wasn't quite ready to take the leap and go work for NOAA or do something of that nature. So I started chasing and really kind of discovered an interesting environment when I started storm chasing, which mostly meant that for some reason we weren't seeing a lot of women in the space. And it wasn't in fact that they weren't there. In fact, there are quite a few great female chasers out there. And so I just kind of got curious after having spent quite a bit of time in the sciences. and noticed just some really weird cyclic patterns, largely in media and culture, that kind of seem to be lending themselves to this. And eventually got frustrated enough that I decided to launch an Instagram page called Girls Who Chase. And that Instagram page had quite a bit of energy behind it, to the point where we realized that it actually needed to become much more than that, which is now a multifaceted media and education platform. That happened with some speed. In fact, I launched the Instagram page in July 2021. In January 2022, we launched the multifaceted media platform. So that's all the social media, website, a podcast. So we also tell stories and produce our own media. We just recently actually also launched a blog called Meet the Chasers. That's kind of a Q&A based interview series. And along the way, I discovered that a lot of the same reasons that I had struggled to kind of break into this storm chasing space were pretty similar to a lot of barriers to entry for other women into the storm chasing space. And one major one was feeling as though we either needed a meteorology degree or that we didn't know how to get started from an education perspective. And because I worked in the sciences, I kind of had the tenacity and wherewithal to just dig up what I needed to teach myself to forecast. But a lot of folks didn't really know where to find those resources. And if you don't know the people by name or the resources by name, you wouldn't necessarily know where all that stuff is. So the first step we took was just to kind of aggregate all of that into a list that's on our website at girlswhochase.com/education. Most of those are completely free, easily accessible to anyone who wants. There's a couple books in there. And then I thought, it'd be kind of fun to put together like a entry-level storm chasing 101 for all of these folks who were just interested in what it took to get started in storm chasing. And I don't think all of them necessarily even planned to chase, but it was more like, you don't wake up one morning and get sent to storm chasing school like a lot of our other types of skill sets that you develop. So wouldn't it be cool if we had that type of resource available to us? So it was kind of a spaghetti at the wall, like, why don't we piece some of these resources together that we found that are really great people who are great educators, put a couple panels together to talk about what the experience is like storm chasing, and just see who shows up. And my goal was 100 people. That was in March 2023. We ended up with 320 registered instead, which shocked me, and then actually doubled that last year with almost 600 attendees. So it turns out there's actually quite a bit of interest in this area. And I think the combination of coming in at the entry level has made a big difference, as well as making accessible folks who work and play in this space. I think there's a little bit of an intimidation factor with, I don't want to just cold reach out to some random storm chaser and not start asking questions. What if they don't want to answer questions or don't want to talk to me or whatever. So kind of breaking down some of those perceived walls, if you will, and really just stepping into this education space. And I got kind of lucky in that our education partner that stepped into the space with us and has stuck with us the whole way is Comet's Med Ed program. They are pretty much the leading meteorology education providers, at least in the United States, if not more broadly, and have really helped us turn this thing into the real deal. So helping to design it, running the back end, bringing in folks to speak to things like radar and satellite, doing lots of interactive modules with us, et cetera. So they've just been a wonderful partner to kind of help us step into this space. And it's really for anyone. This isn't just because we're called Girls Who Chase doesn't mean, men can't join, right? Any age, any background, whatever it is that you're interested in. If you're not interested in storm chasing, but you want to learn about severe weather or forecasting, this is also a great resource. And it's completely remote. So we want to remove as many barriers to access as we can. We keep it really cheap. And we record everything. So it's a day-long, basically remote event. It's a pretty significant day, I would say, where you want to put some time aside and participate. But it really is intended to become a library of resources over time. So we record everything, we put the whole thing together as a recorded package. You can buy it after the fact. Spring Training 24 and 23 are both available if you want to get started early. And all
You can
that
watch them as a
info-
trilogy.
It is, yeah, it's a trilogy, which God knows when we finally get finished. All that stuff is at girlswhochase.com/education. So if you want to look at the bios of past speakers, basically I bring in folks who are just expert in these various areas, and they do presentations on various topics. We are adding a new capacity this year, which is networking. We've gotten a lot of requests to meet other chasers in the region and just be able to chat with folks and just basically start to build community. So we're converting our lunch period into a networking room / if you really want to take a lunch, by all means, go do that. And then before and after, we've got presentations, case studies, and we also offer some dual skill level options. Like we have an entry level kind of how to utilize satellite for making storm chasing decision making day of, and then we have an intermediate advanced radar presentation. Last year we had an entry level radar presentation, so we're kind of trying to build on some of these things in some key areas for storm chasers. So I think just to kind of back out to the 100,000-foot level, the point of the education here again is to kind of break down some of these barriers. Even if folks are just curious about severe weather or want to interact with chasers or hang out at the panels and hear what people's experiences are like, or if you're considering meteorology but you're not sure it's for you, or like the math might be too much, these are some great places to ask questions about that kind of stuff. And because it's working, we've just kind of continued down that road right now. So March 1st, Spring Training 2025, all the info, schedule, bios, how to register, girlswhochase.com/spring training.
We've got a QR code there on the screen. You've just said the website, girlswhochase.com. Not only is it working, it sounds like it's succeeding based on you beating your goals by 3 times or more for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
You mentioned networking, Jen. I'm wondering if there's any stories or anything you can share in terms of the participants from previous years, the people who you have mentored and met out in the field. Where are they today? What type of success stories are there?
That's a great question. Anecdotally, I've got a list a mile long, actually. It's been an interesting experience as this thing has evolved. I did not create it to be a business or to offer all of these various capacities, but it's evolved kind of as the need has arisen. And one of the ways I think that Girls Who Chase has made the biggest difference is that it's helped other women recognize that they're not alone in this kind of space that I felt like I was alone in when I was starting to storm chase, which was, I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if I really understand how to get started. Who do I ask questions of? What if I don't want to go out by myself? Like, what if I'm interested in a chase partner or going out with an expert or something like that? How do I find those resources? And so just the fact that it sort of began to exist, I think sent a message that not only are you not alone, but like this is completely doable, that you are capable of doing this thing. And it's ultimately, I like to say it's kind of a women's empowerment program skinned in women in STEM, because the message here really is, even if you're not into storm chasing, the point is that you can do this. There are always resources and you're not alone. But I think like one of the ways that we've seen that manifest in the weather space is that it's helped women find each other. So either they've become resources for each other, or in some cases, for example, we've had some chase partnerships that have developed out of Girls Who Chase specific activities where, they decided to come out together and spend a week-long chasecation chasing together and using resources they've pulled from other areas or from Girls Who Chase trainings or something like that. In other cases, I've had women reach out and say, I'm 35 and I thought I was kind of done with the career choice and I was just taking this road and meteorology is just not for me. But after, seeing all of these folks talking about what it took to choose their meteorology related career or some other career related to weather, I now feel like actually this is a possibility for me where I wouldn't have known that previously. So I think it's been a combination of, providing information that's helped people make decisions where they feel safer or that more welcome than they had realized. The networking component, I think, has been a little bit of a surprise for me, in that we just keep getting asked about it more and more. Can we have regional in-person meetups, which is something,
Wow.
that I'm kind of pondering, but don't really know how to deal with yet because we're global. Or do we just pick a corner of a road one day during a high risk in Oklahoma and just see how many people show up? So I think in these areas, it's almost been that the need has been identified as we've stepped further and further into these various spaces, and people have come forward and said, I think this would be really useful, or why don't we try this thing and see how it works out for us? But for sure, I think it's helped build confidence, and helped other women see that they're not alone necessarily, even though it felt that way. And in other ways, I think it's done that for more than just women. For folks maybe who just didn't see themselves in this community, it's just created a bit more of a welcoming environment that's made a difference for people. So I'm pretty excited about that.
All right. Well, Jen, I want to ask you maybe a more personal question here. What exactly got you to start chasing? And did you have any mentors that helped you along the way?
I've had a few. So it's an interesting story. One of the things that we talk about a lot with Girls Who Chase, and I'm actually headed to the mountains tomorrow to give a talk on that this weekend, is in some ways we all put barriers in front of ourselves. So barriers aren't necessarily just an external issue. They can also very much be an inside job. And I think in my case, I had a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have started storm chasing. Like, you need the 4-year degree, it's dangerous, and you should go with experts. I think some element of it that was more subconscious was that I wasn't seeing people who looked like me in storm chasing media. Like, I wasn't one of those avid consumers of reality television, and I just was watching the Weather Channel when I was 8. And so anyone who was on air storm chasing, there weren't a lot of women in a lot of those shows. And so I think there's a bit of a subconscious decision-making process that happens. And for me, the way that manifested was that I just practically decided I didn't belong and that this wasn't for me. And then I sort of quit trying to look into it. I didn't keep pushing. I just made the decision and then went on with my life and was kind of bummed about it. And I actually was on Facebook one day scrolling, as one does, and came across an ad for a discount on a storm chasing tour. And I didn't know those existed. I had no idea there was such a thing. And, I had been telling myself all this time, well, you should go with experts and it's dangerous and whatever. Well, here are some of the experts. So of course I had to go digging. But while looking at that ad, I actually caught myself saying, I can't do that. And I was like, where is this coming from, actually? And how long have I been telling myself that about this thing that actually I'm really into? I don't know if you've ever caught yourself in one of those moments where you're like, okay, this actually might not be true here. And I'm just sitting here telling myself this story. So, and I happen to be in a position financially where I could do it. I was working full time, and gainfully employed and all of those things. So I sent myself on the storm chasing tour, and it was June 2018. The tour left out of Denver. I live in Denver, so I thought, well, this is easy and practical. And it was a pretty quiet year. So we didn't see a ton on the tour. I think we saw a supercell in South Dakota and spent an excessive amount of time sitting at a gas station in Glendive, Montana, which is now one of my favorite places to troll because I am an avid Northern High Plains chaser. But
James trolls Glendive too because they're the lowest ranked TV market, right?
That's right. I don't know.
Is there a market in Glendive?
I just know to go along with whatever Frank says. That's right, Frank.
I don't want to get nasty emails from people in Glendive, but yeah,
right.
Fair.
They have a lovely gas station.
And I those poor tour guides, because I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that, but I basically spent the entire 7 days with my little, I had like a little nerd book that I had brought with me. And it really, I thought this was an experiment. Like I was like,
Yeah.
now I can see what it's really like. Maybe I have this whole concept of it that's not true and I'll just hate it. And then okay, fine. There's one way to know. And I just caught myself everywhere they went, every decision they made, I'd be like, why'd we do that? Why'd you make that decision? And then one day, Glendive, a storm formed over the gas station, basically. And I was like, how did you know this was going to happen? Oh my God, this is right. So I think a lot of folks who were on that tour were there, they just wanted to see tornadoes. They didn't really care how we got there. And I was like, so annoying that I started annoying myself after a few days of like, okay, that's enough questions, Jen. Like, so it was very clear to me when we got back from the tour that, okay, clearly I'm interested in this and need to start digging. But what they gave me was basically enough information to be dangerous, pun intended, like that I could actually teach myself to forecast. There were resources out there, and that storm chasing was something that I could actually get out there and do on my own with the right information. And so I started digging in pretty much right away. And I would say for probably the first couple of years, my mentor was one of the folks from that tour who just very kindly answered my 800 million questions, up to and including like, okay, there's a setup today and I'm sitting and watching radar. Why are all the spotter dots in this location? I would be up here. And she basically would say, she was a great teacher because she would just say, well, why don't you go check out dew points and tell me what you think? Like the answer that day, for example, was dry line bulge. And right. So that was how I learned about dry line bulges, but it wouldn't have been the same if she had just told me. So she actually encouraged me to kind of learn it like a teacher. And then since then, I've picked up a couple of mentors, one really who I would say specializes in storm photography, and another actually who is a lava photographer, because I have picked up volcanoes in the last couple of years as well, and am also obsessed with those. And they've just been wonderful teachers, guiding me to the right resources and answering endless questions. But I had a moment shortly after that tour ended that is kind of always going to be my like coming of age story when it comes to storm chasing. So I lived at the time just north of Denver, Colorado, and typically a lot of storms will form in the foothills and then move east onto the plains and then react accordingly to their environment. And on that particular day, there was clearly a supercell, and I had just learned about the flying eagle presentation on radar. And so it was already rotating in the foothills and actually had a hook on it and was starting to move east onto the plains. And I was working from home and decided I was going to go after it. Like I just remember looking at that thing and thinking, okay, that thing's going to do it. And, I have enough of a clue that I'm not going to kill myself. So let's go. And I rushed out to the car and still had my pajamas on because I was in such a hurry to get out of there, and hopped in the car and made every rookie mistake known to man. I was on the wrong side of the storm, and accidentally drove through a pretty decent sized city and got stuck in traffic and got even further behind. All these things that tours take care of that you don't have to think of, I was now learning in real time the hard way. And eventually got to the east side of that town and crested a hill, and in front of me was my first tornado spinning in a field. And I know that's not a story that's shared by a lot of people. A lot of people are like, I had to go 5, 6 years, 10 years before seeing a tornado. And I just remember standing outside of my car shouting, jumping up and down in my pajamas. Like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And that was probably the moment that like the monster that is Jen Walton Storm Chaser was really born. I think it was not just getting to see the tornado in person, which was an amazing experience. And luckily it was just kind of spinning in a field and then dissipated, so it wasn't doing damage. But also recognizing that I was the one that had gotten myself there. I think for me, that was incredibly uplifting and empowering. And that's the energy I think that is driving what I want Girls Who Chase to bring for other people. And again, it does not have to be, driving out to see a tornado in your pajamas, although I highly encourage the whole experience.
The
But
whole
right,
package.
Well,
right? But just that energy of actually you really can do this thing, and is the only thing standing in your way you?
Well, we're so glad, Jen, that you've put this program together. Hopefully, people feel inspired by the story you've shared here. And if they can relate to it and feel like they have things they want to achieve similar to the path you went down, this spring training event is for them. Saturday, March the 1st from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time, girlswhochase.com. We do have a QR code on the screen for anybody who's watching with us on YouTube or Facebook. And again, March 1st. So they've got a couple weeks here to make sure they clear their calendar for this. If they're able to join you live, or I think you said it'll be recorded for them
Yep.
to come back to later if that's more logistically sound, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, if you do register and then something comes up, or you can't make it on the 1st, but you want to participate or, get the benefit of all of the programs, you can register, and you will basically have a YouTube library link sent to you afterward that contains everything, and that will be there forever. So you can refer back to it as often as you like. That's basically what your registration gets you if the live day isn't doable.
Fantastic. Jen, thank you for your time tonight, and thanks for putting this together and for reaching out. We're glad we can help get the word out here on the Carolina Weather Group.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me, y'all.
No problem. Safe travels, and good luck with the event. Frank, we have a couple weather headlines to get to tonight as we wrap up this live edition of the Carolina Weather Group. And we'll start with this weather anniversary. Tomorrow, February the 6th, marks 5 years since an EF1 tornado came through southern Mecklenburg County on the ground for 13 miles and was traveling from Carowinds through Pineville, South Charlotte into Matthews. I stumbled across it, and I have this video to take us back in the weather time machine. Take a listen. Is there sound on that?
nope.
Oh, I'm here where the storm hit. I don't know why there's no sound on it. Either way, I do remember A, getting soaking wet, as you can probably tell. B, I was trying to get to the TV station where I'm employed, but found myself in the middle of the polygon. Thank goodness for the weather radio in my car that let me know that I was driving into trouble. You can see these pine trees that came down, damaged a couple fences, damaged a couple homes. Ended up in Brad Panovich's neighborhood, which was really funny, talking to his neighbors, the chief meteorologist on TV, and you're standing on his street unknowingly. But this thing was on the ground for quite some time. And I remember, and we talk about, Frank, right? Always having like a safe place. And I was trying to get to work and I wasn't home. And I remember calling my family, like, get to the safe place, which for us is under the stairs. Cause this thing came within like a mile of where we live. It was on the ground for so long. And it was hard to believe 5 years ago. And it was also right before the pandemic. And that was a crazy severe weather season and hurricane season, that 2020 year, of course.
Right. And while we were talking, I managed to find in the damage assessment toolkit the path of that storm. So if you want to go to my screen share,
go to your screen share.
There it is. Started just a little east of Carowinds, went across Pineville, went across 485, went all the way over to went into Union County, I guess, a little bit there too.
Yep. I think it just started either in or short of York County, South Carolina. I do think it clipped, like you said, part of Union County, North Carolina. I mean, for this region, it was on the ground for a while. Pretty strong in EF1 tornado. And this is obviously a highly densely populated area. So there was plenty for this tornado to impact.
Yeah, and it looks like the parent supercell caused a straight line wind damage along Carowinds Boulevard there too. So there was some damage in South Carolina from it.
Yes. So 5 years since the tornado, but 2 years since. We need to go back over to Scotty Powell for a moment. Joining us back here on the call. Scotty's audio is connecting.
Yes, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone.
What do you mean it's gone?
They just shot it out. It is completely gone.
Is that what we're seeing there? And
I just heard 2 rockets, missiles hit, and it's gone.
We talked about this during our 500th episode celebration on the Carolina Weather Group just towards the end of last year. And it's that exact moment that is burned into my brain, Frank. Scotty going, it's gone, it's gone. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's talking about the balloon, but I need him to say the words, the Chinese spy balloon has been shot down off the coast of Myrtle Beach. That's what I need you to say, Scotty.
Yep.
Closing the
You know,
airspace. And, this was such a weather-centric day that we woke up that morning, and remember, the first thing I saw was Evan Fisher's photo on CNN of the balloon outside of Asheville, and I was like, it's going to be a long day as we were tracking those upper level winds. What a strange day. Where were you, Frank? Do you remember where you were when that balloon suddenly was out our window?
If I recall correctly, I was at work that day in Columbia, and so I couldn't go and try to see the thing for myself because
it was a weekend. So did you get activated?
Oh, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I was playing pickleball instead. Just didn't care.
That'll show you, spy
I
balloon.
don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I knew I had a reason that I couldn't go and get a look at it for myself, but I couldn't remember what that reason was.
Jared Smith was driving down to Charleston. Scotty Powell went out to Myrtle because, we didn't know exactly where this was going to go. We were just kind of guessing where this was going to end up or what the military was going to do. What a wild.
I think that was part of it is I thought the military really wasn't going to do anything and just let it go. And so I thought, this is going to end up being a nothing burger.
Yeah. What a strange event. So 2 years ago, there you go. The Chinese spy balloon shot down off the coast of South Carolina. We mentioned this a little bit during our interview with Corey, but wildfires impacting Western North Carolina. It was the topic of last week's show before we learned of the tragedy in D.C. The fires in McDowell County in particular tonight are doing better than they were last week. The emergency management office there telling us yesterday that they did reopen the comfort station at New Horizon Church. That's on US 221 North. The North Fork fire got to 90% containment after growing to 644 acres. That's the second of the three fires that we were telling you about last week. The main fire we were telling you last week as we were talking to Jason Boyer was contained. It was that first fire that led to some evacuations. Second fire, third fire, not so much in terms of evacuations, but as you can see, they have reopened that comfort station for anybody that maybe needs a break from the smoke or even the heat that we've been having. And we'll keep a close eye on these fires as we've been talking about. Overall, very dry, very warm, and as Jason told us last week, Jason Boyer, WLOS chief meteorologist, there is of course a lot of Helene storm damage that is littered this area that will make, unfortunately, fire season all that more prime. Speaking of the Helene recovery, it's important to us here at the Carolina Weather Group that we keep our finger on the pulse. FEMA has extended the deadline for Helene survivors who may need assistance with housing, financial assistance with repairs of homes or roads, even small businesses. So the deadline to apply for this assistance has now been extended to March the 8th of 2025. Scrolling at the bottom of your screen are the list of counties where people who reside or have businesses would qualify for this FEMA aid. And you can go to disasterassistance.gov. You can call 1-800-621-3362 to talk with a rep and find out exactly what it is you may qualify for in terms of disaster assistance. Again, FEMA extending the deadline to apply to March 8th, 2025. You're taking a look at video that Bumpkin County posted today on Facebook. Look at that truck. Just again, one of the very scary moments and situations that played out across Western North Carolina. They recovered and removed this truck today from the Swannanoa River. It has been there since September the 27th. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who we met at Lake Lure in December, continuing their operation. And I think this was in their post, and I think this is important to mention as well, too, that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been on this recovery mission since October 12th. About a week or two after the storm. So they are one of the resources that continues on the ground as we continue to recover from Helene. we take you back over to DC, where just a week ago, the heart wrenching news of that aviation disaster when we had the American Airlines flight collide with the military jet. This is new video released by the NTSB, and we wanted to give you an update tonight on where things stand with the investigation following that live coverage we had for you last week here on the Carolina Weather Group. We have since learned that the flight crew of the American Airlines flight being operated by PSA Airlines was based right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. One of those funeral services being held today as victims of this flight disaster are being returned to their friends and their families, as we are still very young into this disaster, very early into this disaster, with investigators still working to remove pieces of both aircrafts from the Potomac River. They're just off of the coastline of Reagan Airport. You can see video here of those pieces that will be removed and taken into the lab as investigators continue their investigation. The so-called black box recordings from the American Airlines flight have been recovered. The black box data recorder and the voice cockpit recorder from the military Black Hawk helicopter has not yet been recovered from the river. I believe my understanding is that could happen sometime tomorrow. After that data gets back to the lab, we expect to hear a little bit more from NTSB investigators as they will be comparing those two. But again, what an unfortunate tragedy, lots of unanswered questions, lots of finger pointing that has already happened as families are still working to remember, memorialize, and say their final goodbyes to the victims of this crash, whose names we're slowly beginning to learn as notifications have been made. But Frank, I think certainly a moment in time that will not be forgotten, as we saw play out in real time last week when the whole nation realized that something horrible had happened there outside of DC.
Yeah, I think the final death toll was 70, if I remember correctly, and I don't think there were any survivors on either aircraft. I think that all
Yeah.
perished, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I remember there was one moment of hope when we were on last week. We had heard reports that maybe there had been at least a couple of survivors, and learned the devastating news the next day that piece of information unfortunately turned out not to be true, which is always tough to hear, as we were, I think, all anxiously awaiting some sort of good news, and then again learning that the PSA employees who were operating that flight on behalf of American Airlines were scheduled to return to North Carolina and to their homes here in the greater Charlotte area, really bringing an already a heartfelt tragedy even closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll continue to keep our eyes on that, as again, we expect more information from that January 29th mid-air collision to be released by the NTSB in the weeks ahead. I also do want to make a quick programming note that again, last week we pivoted to covering that crash. We still have sound, which is to say video clips to share with you from President Donald Trump's visit to Asheville with Franklin Graham and speaking with some survivors of Helene. We still have those video clips we need to bring to you. You know, it was our conversation the first half of the show with Corey Davis and with our own Frank Strait about the climate that we slid from last week. We slid some of these Donald Trump highlights from his visit to the Helene impacted area, and we'll have those for you in the coming weeks here on the Carolina Weather Group. Frank, I know you and I have discussed trains many a times. They run in your family, and I read today that CSX Railroad has completed another leg of its recovery operations in western North Carolina, reconnecting their freight line to Spruce Pine, where there is mining operation for quartz. For anybody who is a tech nerd and thinks about semiconductor manufacturing, so much of that coming from Spruce Pine, that has now been reconnected to that vital trade route. And I know Norfolk Southern is working on getting their tracks reconnected to Asheville as well, too, as all these months later, we're still working on rebuilding western North Carolina.
Yeah, so one step at a time. It's going to be a slow process, and as Corey said earlier, it'll be all of 2025 and probably into 2026 and maybe beyond before we get things back to where they need to be. But we are making the slow progress, one step at a time.
One step at a time. We'll keep our finger on the pulse. We're going to try to end on a high note here on this Wednesday, February the 5th, the birthday of the National Weather Service, or the birthday of the first weather observer here in the United States history, which we now mark as National Weather Person's Day. So, Frank, I hope you had your cake and your balloons and your streamers to celebrate National Weather Person's Day, because it only comes but once a year.
I did not actually, but it was still a pretty good day. At least I wasn't sick like I was over the weekend or having to fix someone's car.
Yeah. Well, our hats off to, and I love the way it's phrased, National Weather Person's Day, kind of like Jen was talking about in terms of, whether you hold a degree, whether it's a 4-year degree or an 8-year degree, or you studied something else and you have found your way into the adjacent weather world, it's National Weather Person's Day. So it's not just for your favorite broadcast TV meteorologists, although those are the ones you probably see most often. It's for all of the researchers and the storm chasers and the emergency managers and the forecasters and dare I say the podcasters. And so we hope all of our fellow friends in the weather industry had a very happy National Weather Person's Day. And I do look forward to next year's balloons and streamers.
I hope so.
I hope.
Maybe we'll do something special in the state climate officer in South Carolina next year for it.
And invite your favorite podcast friends.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Got a new building to show off and everything.
You do have a new building to show off. That sounds exciting. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Carolina Weather Group in this, yes, I can't believe it's February 5th, 2025. Frank, thanks for wearing both hats. And thanks to all you at home for streaming with us on YouTube or listening on your favorite audio podcast app. This is where a good podcast host would tell you to subscribe and hit the bell and rate us so that your friends can find us in their feeds. We do very much appreciate that.
Yes, and so maybe this could actually pay for itself one day.
Yeah, so we can pay for our own balloon and streamers next National Weather Person's Day. That's our goal.
Right.
So, that's right. All right. Well, on behalf of Frank, I'm James Brierton. Thanks to our guests, Corey and Jen. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Be well.
Y'all have a good one. See you next week. Are you pulling a Scotty?
I know. We're actually still live because I've remembered I just forgot one thing. So this is like Carolina Weather Group overtime. But we had that wonderful SpaceX launch yesterday at about what was that, 6:15 or so? And on our Facebook, we asked our fans, "Did you see it?" And so many people did that I wanted to make sure we took a moment this week to show off some of these wonderful photos of the launch. So here's Mark. I don't know that Mark gave us a location, but you can see it right here. So this was a launch from Cape Canaveral in Florida that we were able to see here in the Carolinas because the sun had set. It was nice and dark on the ground. This is what I kind of saw where I was in Mecklenburg County. You saw almost this jellyfish cloud come up from the horizon on the southern horizon.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yep. And then right on, I think you can see my mouse cursor right in here, it kind of ballooned where there was stage separation, and then the rockets came back down, the first stage, and the satellites and the second stage kept going. So you kind of had that separation. This is from Bethany Bell. What a wonderful photo there. Maureen took this one in Surfside Beach, South Carolina. So you can kind of see, that just looks like quite a lovely evening out on the beach, and what a show to be seen as we got to see this rocket launch. Oh, here's some video that Mark Lee recorded for us. Look at this shooting across the star. This is great video contrast.
It's fantastic.
My phone couldn't do the depth for whatever reason, but the darkness on the horizon with the setting sun still in the upper layers of the atmosphere illuminating that craft and that vapor. Mark, this is magnificent video. I'm floored in being able to see it, and I bet you it was even better in person. So thank you for taking the time to share that with us. Let's see. We had another video from Eric in Lodson. Did you get to see this launch yesterday, Frank?
No, I did not. And this time I actually was playing pickleball, and unfortunately, where we were playing, there was not a good view of the sky in that direction. There were too many trees in the way, and I looked for it, but we couldn't see it there. So
here's a picture from Newbern. That's from Trisha. My son and I climbed a big hill. There's some construction going on here in Matthews near the interstate, and they like dug out to get new interstate ramps in, and we went up this big hill where they had put all the dirt. So it got us to the tree line. It was magnificent. I don't know if the NCDOT is going to be too happy with my doing that, but that's what we did. Beth took this one from Myrtle Beach. Thank you, Beth. I want to just make sure we show all these wonderful pictures. Lakin from Hatteras here. We know Sam Walker out there on OBX saw a similar view as well too. I think I got a lot of those in. Let's see. Do I have the video of my son and I? Yeah, here we are.
Right there! Right there! There it is!
Right there?
Yeah, you see it?
I see it. That over there? I saw that right before and I thought it was like a...
I think that's it.
Yeah, that is it. That is totally it.
So I think it just had stage separation because there's two plumes.
So I don't know who was more excited, me or him, but what?
I think you were more excited.
Maybe.
You acted more excited.
I was very
But he
excited.
seemed excited too.
Yeah, he got there. He actually, I think, saw it before I did. So anyway, thanks for staying tuned after the credits. We're like a Marvel movie now.
Yeah.
We stick something
And thanks to going into overtime, Stormy the Weather Cat has happened
Stormy.
along. Hi, Stormy. Hi, everybody.
Gotta love Stormy. I think Stormy needs something in the merch store. We should work on that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Need to have a Stormy the Cat mug or something.
In Stormy we trust.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Okay, goodbye.